Hello. Tonight, I want to tell you a story about broken silence, about inexplicable things creeping into ordinary life, turning peace into permanent insecurity. Find a comfortable place, close your eyes if you want, and listen. Listen to the story of my house, the roads I take, and the uninvited figures. It all started when I moved into this one-story house. I was looking for peace, a refuge from the noise of the city, and this neighborhood seemed like the perfect answer. The streets are wide and clean, the lawns are neatly manicured, and the neighbors just nod politely as I pass by. The house itself was nothing special, a bit old but cozy, and most importantly, it was within my tight budget. I was so proud, feeling like I had finally found a private corner. The first day passed in the chaos of packing. Boxes were piled everywhere. The house has only one floor, so moving furniture is less difficult. That evening, exhausted, I sat on the only couch not yet covered by the box, water bottle in hand, looking around the makeshift living room. The silence was comfortable, almost absolute. No traffic sounds, no loud music from neighbors' houses. There was only the sound of my own breathing and the faint hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. I chose this place for its quietness, and that first night, I slept like death, the deep, dreamless sleep I had long craved. The first few days passed quite normally. I arranged the furniture and got used to the new space. I even had a brief conversation with an elderly neighbor across the street. He said the area is very safe, very quiet. People respect each other's space.
Sounds ideal.
The house has 2 extra bedrooms downstairs that I hardly use. One room I plan to use as my home office, where I put my desk and computer, because my job requires flexible work hours and sometimes late hours. The other room was the guest room, almost empty except for an old bed and a small wardrobe. That room always felt a bit cold and dimly lit, facing north, but I didn't really mind. The first anomaly was not a loud noise or a ghostly apparition. It's much more sophisticated. It's a scent. On the second or third night, I was walking along the downstairs hallway when a strange smell entered my nose. It's not like the usual musty smell of an old house. It was like a strange mixture of cheap, harshly sweet perfume and something like a cleaning chemical, perhaps bleach. The scent was so strong that I had to stop, trying to determine its source. It seemed to be coming from the empty living room. My stomach tightened inexplicably. There's something about this scent that makes me feel uneasy, a vague warning. A few days later, when the scent did not disappear but seemed to get stronger at night, I decided to check the room. I unlocked the door. I always lock it because there's no reason to open it. Turned on the light and took a deep breath. The scent is stronger inside. I carefully checked the walls, corners, under the bed, and in the closet. No stains, no signs of leaks, no mold. The wall is dry. The closet was empty, except for a spare blanket I kept in the bottom drawer, still clean and folded. No trash, no signs of animals or insects. I didn't find anything unusual, except that unpleasant smell. I opened the window for ventilation, and the scent seemed to dissipate. But it doesn't disappear completely. Every night, when the sun goes down, the scent returns, creeping through the door, even though I tried to block it with a towel. It became a permanent part of the evening, a reminder that something was wrong in my quiet house. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just old chemicals in the paint or finish, that it would evaporate over time. But deep inside, a vague worry began to sprout. Then came the doorbell. About a week after I moved in, late one night, around 11 o'clock, I was sitting on the couch watching a movie when the doorbell rang, a short, sharp ring. I stopped the movie and listened. No footsteps, no calls. I waited a few seconds, then carefully went to the door and turned on the porch light. Nobody. The driveway was empty, the sidewalk silent under the pale streetlights. Not a single person, not a strange car, not even a stray cat. My heart beat normally again. I figured it could be an electrical short, an old doorbell, or maybe sensitive to voltage changes. I closed the door, locked it, and went back to watching the rest of the movie, trying not to think too much about it. But then it happened again. A few nights later, around 2 a.m., I was tossing and turning in bed. I'm a person who has trouble sleeping. The doorbell rang again, clearly and decisively in the stillness of the night. This time, my whole body was tense. I jumped up, grabbed the flashlight on the nightstand, and headed straight for the front door. Open. There's no one again. I stepped out onto the porch, the cool night air touching my skin. I stood there, listening. Only the sound of crickets chirping and leaves rustling in the distance.
No footsteps, no whispers.
It was just me in my pajamas, feeling a bit silly and starting to get frustrated. I went back in, locked the door carefully, my mind constantly replaying the sound of the bell. It is not weak or quiet. It's exactly the same as if someone actually pressed the button. That weekend, the doorbell rang 3 more times, all at late hours. My discomfort started to turn into real anxiety. I tested the doorbell button during the day. It looked completely normal. I'm not an electrician, but I decided to replace it just to be sure. I bought a new bell button, removed the old one, installed the new one, and rechecked the wiring. Everything seemed stable. That night, I stayed up late, made a cup of strong coffee, determined to catch whoever was teasing me. But the doorbell didn't ring. I went to bed around 1 a.m., feeling cautiously relieved. The next day, nothing happened either. I'm starting to hope the problem has been resolved. But that hope was only fleeting. Around 4 a.m. Tuesday morning, the bell rang twice in succession. Ding dong, as if someone was pressing on. My heart sank, adrenaline surged. I jumped out of bed, stumbling a little in the dark, and yanked the door open. Still empty space. The lawn is dim under the streetlights. Blood pulses pounding in ears. I turned on the flashlight and scanned the grass and bushes. Near the edge of the fence, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow that passed quickly and disappeared before my eyes could register. I took a few steps out onto the grass, my bare feet feeling the cold dampness of the night dew. The street was quiet. The surrounding houses were silent and dark. A cold feeling ran down my spine, not only because of the night dew, but also because of the strange feeling that someone was very close, watching me from the darkness. I quickly went back into the house, locked the double door and sat down at the kitchen table, completely awake, my heart still pounding. That morning, I was exhausted. Strong coffee also didn't help me stay completely awake at work. I was still working in the office at that time. I lost concentration. My mind kept spinning with the sound of the doorbell and the fleeting shadow. Neighbor children playing pranks? There are hardly any children around, and they won't be out at 4 a.m. A more complicated electrical problem? But why is there this feeling of being watched and that shadow? A friend suggested that I install a security camera. That seems like a reasonable idea. The very next day, I bought a simple motion-activated camera, installed it facing the porch, and connected it to my phone. That night, I felt a little more secure, hoping there would be evidence or at least the harasser could be stopped. That peace of mind lasted until about 2:30 a.m. The doorbell rang. Almost simultaneously, my phone reported motion detected. Heart pounding, I immediately turned on the camera feed on my phone. My porch display empty. Not a single person in sight. I rewound the clip. The motion sensor activated, but the video captured only a blur, a shadow moving extremely quickly at the edge of the frame. It was too fast, too vague to determine what it was: an animal, a tree branch blown by the wind, or a person deliberately avoiding the camera. My feeling leans towards the latter. I turned on the porch light from my phone app and rushed out the door. Still no trace. I started paying more attention to small details around the house. The patch of grass near the fence, where I thought I saw movement, looked a bit trampled, as if someone had stood there many times. I once found a faint footprint in the damp ground next to a flower bed, not a heavy footprint. It looked like it belonged to someone lighter than me, but I wasn't sure. I tried to capture more footage, moving the camera to different angles, but the results were still fleeting shadows or nothing at all. It felt like something knew about the camera and was deliberately avoiding it. Around 3 a.m. another night, the bell rang again. This time, I opened the door quickly enough to hear a very light rustle in the grass, like the footsteps of someone running away cautiously, trying not to make any noise. "Who is there?" I shouted, my voice cracking slightly with tension. No answer. I swept the flashlight around. There were only shadows of dancing bushes, quiet streets, and silent houses. My stomach tightened. I stood there for a moment, cold sweat pouring down my forehead, feeling exposed and toyed with. Finally, I turned back into the house, my hands shaking. I tried talking to the neighbor on the right, a middle-aged man who seemed friendly. He said he didn't hear or see anything unusual and wished me luck. He seemed sincere, not like he was hiding anything. The incident escalated the following week. The doorbell started ringing more often, sometimes 2 or 3 times a night. There was even one time at 10 p.m. which wasn't too strange. I was hoping it was a friend dropping by unexpectedly. But when I opened the door, there was still emptiness and a familiar feeling of discomfort. My sleep became a luxury. Long nights were cut to pieces by the shrill sound of the doorbell. My back ached from the constant bounces. During the day, I pretended like a ghost, made mistakes at work, and was easily irritable. When people asked, I just mumbled something about having trouble sleeping in a new place. I don't want to admit that I'm scared of my own house, scared of the doorbell ringing. One Thursday night, around midnight, I decided to stay awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a thermos of coffee and my phone showing the live camera. My eyes felt heavy, but I forced myself to stay awake. The sound of the refrigerator humming was the only sound. Then the doorbell rang. I immediately looked at the phone. Live images showed a fleeting blur near the edge of the field. I rushed out the front door. As soon as I opened the door, I heard those gentle footsteps again, disappearing into the darkness. "Stop!" I screamed and ran out into the yard. I heard rustling in the fence. I ran there and shined my flashlight. Nothing, just leaves and darkness. I stood there, panting, feeling a surge of frustration and helplessness. The blood vessels are still beating strongly in the neck. I added lights around the house, turning it into a reluctant little fortress. Ironically, I moved here for the peace. The increased light did help me feel a little safer, but they also created new, dancing shadows in my peripheral vision, making my heart skip a beat every time the wind blew. The doorbell continued to ring, regardless of whether the lights are bright or dim, regardless of whether I'm prepared or not. 1 a.m., 3 a.m., sometimes right after midnight. Not constantly, but often enough to wear down my nerves. One night, it rang 4 times. After the 3rd time that night, I snuck out, hid behind my car, and waited, heart pounding loudly in chest. A few minutes of silence passed. Then the bell rang again. I jumped up and ran around to the front porch. Nobody. The frustration reached its peak. I almost shouted angrily into the empty night. At this point, I'm sure someone or something is behind this. It couldn't have been an electrical fault that caused those footsteps and silhouettes. But why? I don't make enemies with anyone. I hardly know anyone in this neighborhood. Someone bored? Someone wants me to leave? I began checking the door locks over and over again, closing the windows tightly even on warm nights, startling at the slightest noises in the house. One night, around 3:30 a.m., the bell rang again. I was so tired. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding, sweat pouring down my temples. I rushed to the door, opened it wide and shouted into the void, "I don't know who you are, but stop!" My voice echoed in the silence. The cold night air enveloped me. Then I heard it, faint footsteps retreating. I slammed the door shut, leaned against the wall, panting, my throat dry. I just wanted to sleep in peace, but instead, I was caught up in this nightly game of cat and mouse with an invisible harasser. Or perhaps, not a guy. And that's my situation with the house. Until now, as I tell this story, I still don't have an answer. The doorbell still rings occasionally at night. Some nights only once, some nights several times. I've strangely gotten used to it, but it still wears on me. With each bell, my muscles tense, my mind awakens. I open the door, look into space, sometimes hear footsteps fading away, then silence again. No face, no voice. It's just me, the empty porch, and the silent street. I still hope to one day find out the truth, but until then, I live in a quiet neighborhood where my doorbell rings at night for no reason I can explain. But the instability is not limited to my home. It began to creep into my work, into my daily habits. Because of the nature of my work and the sleepless nights at home, I often work very late, sometimes staying in the office, sometimes bringing work home and setting up a temporary workspace in the spare room that I had previously planned to use as an office. This is when other strange phenomena begin to intervene. My home workspace is pretty simple. A wooden desk, computer, 2 monitors, some basic audio equipment like a small amplifier, speakers, and a mini mixing console. A friend, Marcos, and I sometimes work on video and music projects together here. The room is quite cramped. The walls are covered with some cheap soundproofing foam panels. The concrete floor is covered with thin carpet. We started noticing strange things about a few weeks later when the doorbell started ringing frequently. I once walked into my office and saw the lights on the mixing console come on, even though I must have powered everything down the night before. I thought maybe I had forgotten, but then Marcos had the same thing with the amplifier. It was on when he arrived, even though he claimed to have turned it off. Occasionally, the audio monitor would spontaneously hiss or crackle as if the cable was loose, but I double-checked it and there was no problem. Initially, we blamed it on an electrical problem in this old building. The homeowner is quite frugal. Perhaps there is a problem with the electrical wiring. Just annoying, not scary. But then one night, while I was working late alone, Marcos asleep on the futon we had placed in the corner of the room, I heard a small pop from the amplifier. I turned around and saw its LED light blinking faintly. What made my heart stop was knowing for certain that the amplifier was unplugged. Its power cord curled up on the floor, not connected to the wall or device. Adrenaline surged. My arms are stiff. I stood up, staring at the small red LED light that blinked a few more times before turning off completely. A light click sounded. My mouth is dry. I felt a cold stream of air run down my arm. Residual charge? Maybe. But that repeated pop and flickering sound seems excessive for the remaining charge. I can't explain it. That night, I did not wake Marcos. He is also stressed about work. I turned back to my computer, trying to concentrate, but every few minutes I glanced toward the silent amplifier, sensing a strange tension in the room. The next morning, I told Marcos. He didn't smile. He stared silently at the amplifier, then said that a few days ago he heard the same pop from the speaker when the main power outlet was turned off. He didn't see a light, but heard a clear noise. Marcos, who was usually very matter-of-fact and calm, looked worried. He even offered to find someone to cast a spell on the room. I raised my eyebrows but didn't object. If it makes him feel better, then so be it. Strange electronic phenomena continue to occur. The audio screen hisses when powered off and is silent when turned on, quite the opposite. The mixing console flashes channel lights even when not plugged in. We tried unplugging everything, retesting each cable and outlet with an electrical tester. Everything is technically normal, but random lights and sounds still appear mainly at night when the main power is turned off. Both of our sleeps were severely affected. Marcos dreamed that the device turned itself on, and when he woke up, he had the feeling of being watched. I, too, wake up at the slightest noise. My neck and shoulders always tense. One night, while I was working late alone, and Marcos had come home, I heard a small pop from the mixing console. I turned around and saw its lights dance for a moment and then go out. My skin tingled. I decided it was time to rest. I saved my work, turned off the computer. At that moment, the amplifier's LED light lit up, flashing 3 times in a steady rhythm, right before my eyes. My ears were ringing, my temples were throbbing, my breath trembled.
No, he whispered.
I'm leaving. I grabbed my backpack and hurried out of that office, feeling like I was running away from my own devices. Marcos was serious about finding someone to perform the cleansing ceremony. We all felt somewhat relieved at that prospect, but had to continue working in this space. The feeling of insecurity is always present. We turn on the lights, try not to look at the devices too much, focus on the screen. But every little pop, every flicker of light in my peripheral vision made my heart sink, my palms clammy. There was something wrong with this room, with this equipment, as if they had a life of their own, acting on their own will at the worst of times. The insecurity doesn't stop there. It also manifests itself in another way, more visually and strangely, on the living room wall, a room that I rarely use other than the office/studio. It was the room that I initially found a bit cold. A few weeks after moving in, after the doorbell ringing and appliance problems started, I noticed small damp spots appearing on that living room wall. At first, there were only small patches, the size of my hand. I wiped them away and opened the ventilation window. They disappeared. But then a larger patch of discoloration appeared in the same area. It was faint, like an uneven shadow. The wall felt cold and damp to the touch, and my hands were also damp with a strange tingling sensation at my fingertips. I assumed it was just the normal moisture of an old house. I tried patching small cracks, caulking around windows, checking gutters, but couldn't find any obvious source of the leak. Then one cold evening, after coming home late from work, I turned on the living room light and froze. A huge dark patch appeared clearly on the wall. It is no longer a random blob. It extended almost vertically from waist level to above my head, and its shape looked like a person facing sideways. I could make out the faint outline of a shoulder and a slight curve where a head might have been. My heart beat strongly. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that it was just a coincidence of humidity, but a chill ran down my spine. I stepped closer. The wall was still damp and cold to the touch, but not slimy or moldy, just damp. I took a few photos with my phone, but in the photos it just looked like a blurry smudge, not clearly showing the shape of the person I was seeing with the naked eye. The air in the room felt strangely heavy, quiet, but not peaceful. It felt like someone was standing in the room with me, watching. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, checking the corners of the room. My breathing became rapid. My hands were cold. I left the light on, opened the window a crack, and tried to calm myself. I wiped the stain with an old towel. The stain fades a bit. Over the next few hours, it gradually disappeared completely. When I went to bed, the wall looked almost normal, with only a very faint blur remaining. But the image of that line kept haunting me. I started to notice a pattern. That human-shaped stain often appears in the late afternoon or evening, especially when the weather outside is cold or humid. It does not always have the same shape, but often it evokes the image of a human body. Sometimes smaller, sometimes larger. I tried recording video, but like photos, the camera never captured the shape as clearly as my eyes saw it. On screen, it was just an unusually wet patch. One night, I decided to sit on the bench and observe the wall. I turned off most of the lights, leaving only one small light on. After about an hour of waiting in silence, a wet spot began to form in the middle of the wall. It was small, then slowly spread out, expanding to the left, then upward, as if water was seeping through an invisible border. My chest tightened, my throat was dry, my palms were sweaty, the hair on my neck stood up. I had a strange feeling of wanting to say something, but didn't know what to say. My mind raced, trying to cling to logic. It was just water, just moisture. But my body was reacting as if it were in danger. As the stain grew, I saw the shape of that shoulder again, then the curve of the head. My heart was pounding. I stood up, walked to the wall, and placed my hand in the middle of the stain. Cold. The wall seemed to shudder slightly under my hand. I snatched my hand back, more frightened. Clear drops of water fell on my hands. After a few minutes, as usual, the stain begins to fade and disappears within an hour. The atmosphere in the room became lighter again. I called a plumber. He checked thoroughly but found no obvious leaks. He mentioned that old pipes can sweat in the cold, but didn't think that was the cause of such a large and oddly shaped damp spot. I tried using a dehumidifier continuously. It does help reduce the frequency and size of the stains a little, but doesn't completely eliminate them. On particularly cold and damp nights, the giant figure reappears, larger than ever, its outline almost touching the ceiling. The musty smell grew stronger, and a chill enveloped me. That night, I couldn't sit still. I paced back and forth in the living room, turning the lights on and off, opening and closing the windows. Heart pounding, feeling stuffy like lack of oxygen. I opened the front door and stood looking out at the empty hallway, feeling like I wanted to run away. But I felt compelled to stay, to watch the shape on the wall, as if to make sure it wasn't doing anything. I know that thought is crazy. I try to distract myself with podcasts, with my phone, but my mind keeps drifting toward the wall. When I returned to the living room, the shape was fading. I stood and watched it disappear, from the head down. When it completely disappeared, my tension subsided, leaving me feeling almost foolish for overreacting. Maybe it's just stress, lack of sleep from nights of being disturbed by doorbells and electronic devices. I tried repainting the wall with a waterproof coating. It helps reduce overall humidity, but the strange silhouette continues to appear on cold, damp days after dark. I started keeping the living room light on at all times, so I wouldn't have to walk into a dark room and face it. I tried talking to the neighbors again, but no one had experienced anything similar. Their damp spots, if any, are usually mold and persistent, not appearing and disappearing as quickly as mine. I tried recording a time-lapse video. The footage shows the wet spot spreading and then shrinking, but on video it looks more random, with no clear human shape as I see it. This contradiction makes me even more confused. I recorded the time, temperature, humidity, and stain size. The rule is still cold and humid. Appearance time is about 1 to 2 hours, fades faster if ventilated. But those scientific notes couldn't dispel the feeling that I wasn't alone in that room every time a stain appeared. The hair on my arms stood up, my stomach was tense, my pulse was pounding, my breathing was shallow, and I always felt like someone was standing right behind me. When the shape disappears, the feeling of tension dissipates. There were no other strange noises from that wall. No voices, no objects moving. Only the wet patch has that scary shape. It wasn't physically harmful, other than discoloring the paint a bit, but it was mentally draining. Sometimes I try to ignore it, sometimes I face it, touch it, wipe it away, even talk to it a few times, which always makes me feel stupid. But it still comes and goes on its own schedule. My sleep got worse. I woke up thinking I heard water dripping, or just to shine my flashlight on the empty living room wall, checking to see if the shape was there. This constant checking exhausts me. I began to accept that I would probably never understand it. Perhaps the previous owner knew more than just the humidity problem, but I can't afford to move right now. I was stuck with it, with this damp, uninvited guest that appeared every time the weather changed, lingered in the living room, jangled my nerves, and then disappeared without a trace. I can't prove it to anyone. It's all in my eyes, in my feelings. I'm trying to live with it, but every time it appears, my chest tightens, my forehead becomes beaded with sweat, and I wait for it to go away, hoping I can sleep peacefully that night. The insecurity at home and the late hours of work make me need escapes and silence. That's why I started jogging at night. The day was too hot, and I thought the coolness and quiet of the night would help relieve my stress. First, yes, the sidewalk was deserted. The air was fresh. Only the sound of my breathing and the sound of my shoes could be heard. But then the anomaly found me again, this time on a particular street near my house, about 2 blocks away. It's a residential area, but quieter and darker than the other streets. Street lights are sparse, creating alternating light and dark patches. The first time I heard footsteps was while running down this street. A light pat followed me, almost in sync with my running pace. I slowed down and listened. The noise stopped. I thought maybe it was the echo or the wind. I accelerated again, and the footsteps returned, still there, half a beat behind me. My body is tense. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. A chill ran down my arm even though the night was quite warm. Mouth is dry. I glanced over my shoulder. Nobody. The street is deserted. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, finished the run and went home. But the next night, when I ran back on that street, the footsteps appeared again. Same rhythm, half a step behind me. This time I suddenly stopped. Immediately, the sound of footsteps behind stopped. My heart pounded loudly in my chest. I turned around and looked carefully down the sidewalk, between the parked cars, into the shadows under the trees. Nothing. I started to slow down. Footsteps sounded again. I speed up. They also speed up. No matter how fast I run, they still maintain that half-beat distance, always out of sight. When I turned another corner, the footsteps disappeared immediately. I started experimenting. I ran back down the street. I circled the block, trying to approach the street from another direction to catch someone in the act. I brought my phone, ready to turn on the flashlight, but the result is still the same. As soon as I ran down that stretch of road, the footsteps reappeared, strangely synchronized with mine, and disappeared when I stopped or left the street. I tried stopping and standing still for 30 seconds, then walking slowly. The sound of footsteps resumed immediately. I tried turning around and running back toward the sound, shining my flashlight. Nothing. The sound stopped as soon as I turned around. I asked the neighbors, but no one heard any strange noises or echoes on that street. They just advised me to be careful when running late at night. I tried changing shoes. No effect. I took off my headphones. Still hear it. It only happened on that street and always followed me. It feels like a sick psychological game. My sleep got worse. I lay in bed, imagining the dark street and listening to invisible footsteps in my head. I became more alert to every noise. One night, I stopped in the middle of that street and shouted, "I know you're there. Show yourself." My voice echoed in the silence, a mixture of fear and anger. Nothing responded. Silent footsteps. I walked the rest of the way, my legs shaking, my first real feeling of fear taking over me. I tried recording with a small camera attached to my belt, facing backwards. When I watched it again, I clearly heard my breathing, the sound of my shoes, and even that faint sound of footsteps on the audio. But the video only shows the empty sidewalk behind me. No sign of people, no movement. That confirmed I wasn't imagining it, but added to the mystery and fear. Finally, I decided to change my running route. I stay away from that street. The stress is not worth enduring. Although part of me was still curious to know what it was, fear and fatigue won out. But I couldn't escape the feeling that something was still there, on that quiet street, waiting for the next jogger in the dead of night. The insecurity seems to follow me even in public places. Late-night work requires me to occasionally stop at a small 24-hour market near my house to buy snacks or drinks. It's a pretty normal place, bright with big glass panels out front. One night, around 1 a.m., I parked my car, got out and glanced at my reflection in the store's large glass. I looked tired, but then I saw it. Right next to my left shoulder in the reflection, there was a faint, dark shadow. It didn't match anything behind me in the empty parking lot. It was like a dark patch stuck to the glass, vaguely shaped like a hunchbacked figure, leaning closer to me in the reflection. My heart started pounding. My scalp tingled. I turned to look behind. No one, nothing. I looked back at the glass. The shadow was still there, attached to my reflection. As soon as I took a step back, out of direct reflection range, the shadow disappeared, not fading, simply gone. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to regain my composure, then hurried into the store, bought things and left without daring to look in the glass again. I tried to convince myself that it was just an illusion caused by the light, due to exhaustion. But the next night, when I had to stop at the same market again, it happened again. I stepped out of the car, and after a few seconds of looking at my reflection, the shadow appeared again behind my left shoulder, blurry but clearly there, moving in sync with me. My breath caught. I slowly looked over my shoulder. Nobody. I turned back to look at the glass. The shape is still floating there. I took a step back. It disappeared. I moved closer. It appeared again, as if there was an invisible boundary. I jumped back in surprise. My heart was pounding. My hands were cold. I rushed into the store. The cashier looked at me strangely. I quickly grabbed my things, paid and left, trying not to look at my reflection. I tried arriving at different times, tried parking at a different angle so I wouldn't look straight into the glass, tried closing my eyes as I passed. But curiosity or instinct always makes me glance. And almost every time that shadow is there, just in the reflection, just on the left shoulder, just in that market. It never appears in car windows or home mirrors, just there. The chill in my left shoulder becomes familiar every time I think about it. I was starting to fear reflective surfaces in general, but that shape only really appeared in the marketplace. One night, I made the mistake of glancing up and seeing that the shadow seemed even closer than before, almost touching my shoulder in the reflection. My heart felt like it wanted to jump out of my chest. Adrenaline surged. I froze in place, then rushed into the store, leaning against the shelf, panting, my legs shaking. The cashier asked if I was okay. I just shook my head, took a glass of water, and tried to calm down. Now, I avoid looking into the glass when I get there. I look down at the ground at my phone, but sometimes, from the corner of my eye, I still catch a glimpse of that dark shape. My mouth was dry. An electric current ran down my spine. I still instinctively checked behind me. Still no one. It didn't hurt me, but it scared me. It affects my sleep. Sometimes I wake up sweating, thinking I see that shadow in the corner of my bedroom, only to realize it's a hallucination caused by fear. I don't know what it is, and I'm not sure I want to know. I just know that every time I go to that market at night, I have to face it with the uninvited shadow in the glass. And so, my life continued in a vicious cycle of insecurity. The house with the mysterious doorbell, the living room with the damp silhouette, the study with haunted devices, the street with invisible footsteps, and the market with the shadow in the mirror. Each phenomenon seemed separate, but together they formed a larger picture of the intrusion of the inexplicable into my life. I was tired, stressed, and always felt like I was on the brink of something I couldn't understand. I had no answers, no clear way out. I can only keep living, keep facing these strange things, hoping that one day they will go away, or at least, I will find a way to not let them destroy me completely. But tonight, as I tell you this story, I am still here, in this quiet but haunting house, listening to every sound, waiting for the next bell, wondering what silhouette will appear on the wall, and whether the shadow in the mirror will be waiting for me at my next stop. The stillness I once sought was now filled with terrifying possibilities, and sleep, peaceful sleep, has become a distant memory.